Welcome back to Tales from the Lab, a veterinary podcast. As you may have noticed, we've made some exciting changes around here. I am your new co-host, Dr. Brad Ryan, Senior Professional Services Veterinarian at Antech Diagnostics.
And I'm Dr. Holly Brown, a clinical pathologist and Chief Veterinary Educator at Antech. Together, we'll be discussing real patients and bring in expert guests to offer deeper insights into the laboratory diagnostics used to solve interesting and challenging cases.
Tales from the Lab is a production of Antech Diagnostics. The intent of this podcast is to provide education and guidance with the understanding that any diagnostic testing and treatment decisions are ultimately at the discretion of the attending veterinarian within the established veterinarian-patient-client relationship.
Our mental health podcast series is meant for educational and informational purposes only. It is not meant to provide medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you need mental health support, please reach out to a licensed professional or crisis line.
Content warning. This episode contains discussions on mental health topics that may be sensitive to listeners. We encourage you to take care of your well-being. If you need mental health support, please reach out to a licensed professional or call or text 988 in the United States or Canada.
Welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Lab. I am Brad Ryan, Senior Professional Services Veterinarian at Antech Diagnostics. Hopefully you tuned in a few weeks ago for my conversation with Dr. Jen Brandt, who is AVMA Director of Member Wellbeing Initiatives. She received her PhD in social work from The Ohio State University, and she is, as far as I'm concerned, the leading expert on all things mental health within veterinary medicine. She's been working with veterinarians for her entire career. I met her as a vet student, or when I was a vet student at The Ohio State University College of Veterinary Medicine, over a decade ago. And during that time, she worked as director of student services. So she has, been listening to the needs and mental health concerns of veterinary students and veterinarians for a very long time. In our first episode, we talked about the integral role of boundary setting as it pertains to mental health. And of course, that is one of many, subcategories that we could place under the topic that we're going to discuss today, which is self-compassion and what that means, what it doesn't mean. I think that, I certainly, and what I've learned, over the recent years attending your lectures, Dr. Brandt, is that I was a lot, or I was just off base in terms of what that meant. I thought self-compassion was a yoga class or, or whatever it might be. Just telling myself I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, doggone it, people like me. But obviously that's not it. It's not it exactly, right? So let's start there. So what is self-compassion? Why is this such an important foundational topic when we're talking about mental health and veterinary medicine?
So when we think maybe more formally about self-compassion, it's the treating yourself with the same kindness and fairness and just maybe gentleness that we would offer a loved one. I can come back in a minute and explain an exercise I do. But in Jen terms, I just cite it's just like being decent to yourself, like just the basics of decency to yourself and not abusing yourself and using language that's harmful to yourself. We're all human and we really are all doing the best we can to get through life. And I think sometimes we can really beat ourselves up about that in the process.
So how does that differ from other topics like self-indulgence? You also mentioned performance-based self-esteem. These are distinct, right? These are not the same as self-compassion. What do those look like, and why is it important that we know the difference?
Yeah, I would say self-indulgence is more, just giving myself whatever I want. I want that, I'm going to get it. Right? It's not the internal dialogue of, I'm a decent person. It would be more of the self-compassion. Self-esteem is largely really based on outside of myself. So if I do something and get rewarded and I can feel really good about that, that can be contributing to self-esteem. But again, self-compassion is just it's the inside relationship that I have with me, and how I treat myself. And we may go into it a little later, but I so often have heard, oh, well, but if I don't beat myself, if I'm not hard on myself, then I won't perform, or I'll be lazy. And like, who says, like, who said that? Where did that come from? Because I don't meet many people who, if they just don't flagellate, constantly, if they're not berating themselves, that they just sit around and don't do anything for society.
Right.
I've not met that person, but that, I think, that's one of the rationales that we have behind this is why I have to be hard on myself. That's what motivates me and keeps me going. Like usually like self-abuse, mean
masochism.
Exactly. The exercise that I'll share is I've worked, with many people who are hard on themselves. And so I'll have them look at an empty chair or a spot on a wall, and I'll say, I want in that chair or that place on the wall, I want you to envision somebody who you really care about. And I add, maybe younger than you or vulnerable, so that you can have a place of tenderness for that individual.
Yeah.
And then I say, I want you to imagine speaking to that loved one, that beloved person, the way you just did to yourself. And you immediately see the reaction. And, and it's often very verbal. Oh, I would never do that. I would never treat someone else like that. Like, that's it right there, right? We should not, including our own selves. And then usually there's, again, a whole series of rationales. Okay, well, that's different. I mean, with me, I need to be hard on myself, but I would never do that with someone else. And so recognizing when we see it happening to someone else, we are horrified by it, and we would not want that for anyone else. And then the goal is to start recognizing it's the same kind of not good thing when we are aiming at our own selves.
You and I have discussed this before. It's, it's a profession that demands, veterinary medicine is a profession that demands compassion. And we are so often walking into an exam room and, dealing with people who are, in very vulnerable states. And there may be moments of, I didn't do enough, or I haven't done enough for my pet, whatever it may be. And, relying on our professional development background and also just good instinct, right? And underlying humanity that's there, we offer that compassion up, and we're able to give that to the client. And then maybe 30 minutes later, we are being completely vicious in our internal dialogue with ourselves about any number of things that might be happening that day, right? Why is it so common in veterinary medicine, or do you think it's common for us not to be able to take that compassion that we're giving outwardly and turn it back around and allow that to flood our own being?
So I would say I do believe it's common in veterinary medicine, and I believe it's common in the population. I think most of us are trained or modeled. Of course, you're supposed to be kind to others.
Yes.
But what happens is, again, I do a lot of things based on family of origin. Let's say, you might have a parent who is raising you. Of course, we're kind to others and do unto others. But then you'll hear the parent berate themselves, not the child, but the parent, you idiot, and you're dumb, or you should have done something else. And so the parent will be doing it. And so what the child takes in is that clearly there's a space for this kind of language. And so that you do unto others, but you don't do unto you. And so we see that kind of modeling, and, we're ingrained that the customer's always right, or, the client in this case, but we don't often apply that to ourselves, and we don't necessarily apply it to our colleagues or those around us either. It tends to be a one-sided compassion.
Right. And you in your lectures on this topic, you often mention Dr. Kristen Neff, right? Who I'm not going to try to give her a resume here, but I believe that she runs the Self-Compassion Research Lab. Is that true?
Yes.
And she talks about, and I've looked into her work, and she says that self-compassion has three elements. There's the self-kindness, which I think we've been sort of focused on here. She also mentions this common humanity, recognizing that most of us, this is part of being a human, right? That most of us have these feelings of self-inadequacy, and that by understanding that this is not a uniquely individual phenomenon that's going on, that can help, just that mere acknowledgement can help cultivate self-compassion, but also this idea of mindfulness. And I think the most important part of that from my research is this idea that we're not over-identifying with the negative thought that's happening, that I am not the thought that I'm having about myself, that it's a thought and I am separate from that. And that's a lot trickier, isn't it? Sometimes for some people,
I think probably for all of us at some point, again, if we haven't seen that, one, there is a kind of a brain bias that we have. It's a negativity bias. And so I like to explain that the brain ultimately wants us to stay safe. And so it is going to be very good at picking out problems, more so than it's going to be wow, isn't it pretty today? Or it'll be like, you did this wrong and you did this wrong. Like, we're trying to avoid any bad outcomes. So it's really wired that way for us to see the negative. And I also go back to early childhood development, that, we don't understand really our place in the whole wide world, or even really anything outside of us. So the only way we have to make sense of things is if something bad happens, you combine that with the negativity bias, it must be me. Right? We're not thinking as a 3-year-old, gosh, what are the contextual factors that were going on? But like, it must be me. And then another explanation, because I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. And so again, we go back to that early training. If we don't learn another way, if we don't learn about reframing or kind of reality checking, then we get really, really good at the beating ourselves up, all really in a goal to try to get control. Like, we want control, we want consistency, and we want to be able to ensure that only good things happen. And for many of us, we believe that path is, if I just beat myself up enough, basically to get myself to do the right thing, then maybe I can prevent anything else bad from happening. So there's a lot of complexity that goes behind this habit.
And yet we know that that I think intuitively we have this idea that, yes, we want to be the best veterinarians that we can be. We want to show up to work and we want to be the absolute best version of ourselves that we can be. And a lot of that is, being the type A student and having the knowledge base, of course. But then there's this whole other element of how we take care of ourselves so that we can actually show up for other people and not be, a mess of a person. I should probably say that in a nicer way, but I call myself a hot mess all the time. So that's kind of the way that's the way I'm thinking.
I call myself sometimes a hot buttered mess. I add in some food product to the mix. Yeah,
exactly. I like that. Butter makes everything more palatable.
That's right.
But I guess my point there is that, I think that it's important for those who are listening to understand that lack of self-compassion actually has been linked to, not the lack of, but the cultivation of self-compassion actually makes you a better veterinarian. Can you expand on that in terms of, what we know about decision making under stress and, making sure that we don't, burn out and completely self-destruct in some cases?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about, again, when that phrasing of, I want to be the best at whatever it is, veterinary professional. And so we tend to think about it as this checklist of just always doing, your best, trying your hardest, whatever, eliminating any mistakes. But rarely when you hear somebody say that is, and I want to cultivate my compassion and my kindness toward myself and others and my, we're not really talking about the emotional aspects. And the reality is when we're self-compassionate, then we get out of that binary of it's all good or it's all bad. It's a more balanced perspective. And when we have that more balanced perspective, it does improve our decision making, right? Because we're not in the extremes anymore. Like we're able to be present, we're able to listen. We can hear the nuance, we can hear the complexity. And so not only then does it help with decision making, again, it can contribute to more team trust. Like we're more present authentically. And like the example I gave you before, because I worked with lots of families over the years, often a parent will say, but I was never judgmental of my child. But the child at some point will say, but you were of yourself. I saw you looking in the mirror, beating up yourself. And the same thing is if that's what we're doing in the job, we might have a boss say, oh, it's okay if you made a mistake. We hear that, but what we see is people getting beat up for making mistakes or beating themselves up. And so we don't ever believe that because we're not seeing it really is okay, that we can learn from that instead of having to beat yourself up. So it's very complex when we think about self-compassion because we think about it as only, well, you're just being nice to yourself or this toxic positivity. You're telling yourself you're great when you maybe weren't that great that day. And it's not that at all. It is a realistic, kind, humane perspective of yourself. And then think about when you have that, how you can model that for others and kind of the contagion effect that has on the people you're around.
I'm having flashbacks to vet school. And, whenever an exam grade was posted, it's just like an explosion went off and everybody's getting on their phones and looking up their grade. And I might be staring down at the C plus. And I've got somebody in my ear behind me, literally calling themselves an idiot or whatever word you want to fill in the blank over their A minus. Right. And, that idea of like, they're like that for them, like you said, they're probably coming at that from like, oh, I could have done better. I want to hold myself to a higher standard. The intention is not to create that contagion of self-loathing or lack of self-compassion. Right. But that's what happens when we're either verbally saying it or letting our nonverbals express that lack of self-compassion. Inevitably, people do compare themselves to each other, right?
Yeah, I was going to say you really have worded that brilliantly, that isn't the intent. We'll assume that is not the intent, but that is the impact. I think about if somebody is looking at me as maybe a model and I make a mistake or didn't do what I want to and I'm just an idiot or, gosh, I'm just going to have to try harder or whatever. Like they're looking at that. Sometimes we think, but that's my leader or that's my model or that's the person I was striving to be like, and they hate themselves or, and if they can't get there and it's never enough, then I'll never achieve that. And of course, those are never the intentions and the words are coming out, but self-compassion is one of those that just has a big ripple effect that we don't immediately see when we think of the term.
Let's start there then. Let's make that our jumping off point to discuss the different patterns that make self-compassion difficult. And I know, I think for me, when I think about the conversations that I see online on social media about mental health and veterinary medicine, they've largely focused on suicide prevention. And then the other word that comes up all the time is perfectionism. And I've said for years that, until I got into vet school and it no longer worked for me, I always felt good about identifying as a perfectionist. I felt like a badge of honor almost. And that was sort of an expectation in the culture that a perfectionist is one who really takes academics seriously and takes the profession seriously. Anything short of that ideal of perfectionism is someone who's not, quote unquote, not enough or not doing enough, not caring enough and so forth. Mm-hmm. So I want to, and of course now I give a keynote speech on mental health and, I sort of start off my presentation by saying no one ever told me that perfectionism was an unhealthy mindset. And I say it as if the sky is blue, and I can just see the heads exploding in the audience sometimes, because obviously we still have a lot of people that are identifying that way, and it's a badge of honor almost, or in the way that they perceive themselves. So let's talk about why perfectionism is a pattern that ultimately does not serve this aspiration towards self-compassion.
I think one, because we're not, right? We're not perfect. We are human. But a lot of, and there are a lot of factors that go into perfectionism, but one of them is really that it results in an external validation. Yes, some internal, but it is also praised and rewarded, and raises come from that potentially, and promotions come from that, and all kinds of external quote unquote proof that you're good enough come from that. And again, that can be tricky to undo. And so self-compassion then almost feels like a threat, and we've also criticized it. We don't criticize perfectionism so much. I mean, except from as researchers, we know it's not the way to go. But in our culture, we don't criticize perfectionists, but we certainly criticize anybody who would be showing emotional vulnerability, or I'm being kind to myself. We have labels for then that's being overly indulgent and lazy, or, what all the terminology that comes along with that. And also perfectionism, again, is not only how I prove to the world I'm good enough, but also how do I prevent these horrible things from happening in my brain. And for a perfectionist, it isn't about, I realize I can't be, I'm not perfect. It's more, I'll just try harder the next time. Right. And so it's like, I find with a lot of perfectionists, it's that the goalposts always move. You can't ever reach it, even if you could, right? Technically, but
right.
We can't reach it because a perfectionist will just move the goalposts and make it even harder the next time. I'll share, I am not a perfectionist. I don't know that that's ever been a quality of mine, but workaholism has been. And it's the same type of thing. I am praised all over the place, for giving all the time. And, gosh, you're available 24/7. Isn't that great? It's hard to recognize that external praise at some point isn't going to sustain my health, but my relationship with me is going to play a big role.
Right. In the book, The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown, which was my first sort of foray into this self-help world, I learned for the first time that, or I guess the takeaway point from that book, there were many, but the one that really stuck with me was that perfectionism is not the same thing as healthy striving.
Exactly.
And it doesn't sound as sexy to say I'm a healthy striver as opposed to I'm a perfectionist. Like a perfectionist, I can understand why that, has a bit of a little sexy quality to it if you buy into it. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, a healthy striver I'm as a recovering perfectionist, that's the terminology that I come back to keep me anchored to self-compassion. Just that I haven't surrendered my my commitment to the profession. I haven't surrendered my commitment to learning throughout my life and constantly improving upon myself. I've just absolved myself of any illusion that I can be something that I can't, and beat myself up every step of the way in doing so. When you can release that and have a different ideal in mind, I think that you can, at least for me, I can start to reality check the messages I'm telling myself and not feel like I'm suddenly this slacker that's given up on self-improvement.
Yeah, I love the term, the healthy striver. Yeah, again, when we look at kind of the external role, if I am a perfectionist and I'm less than perfect, it will be about I didn't do enough. Somehow I'm not enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. I didn't try hard enough. A healthy striver can be, I wanted a different outcome. or I'm looking
Yes.
for a different outcome. And I wonder how I could do that, right? It's not a personal failure. It's not a character indictment. If I didn't get the outcome I wanted, it's really an opportunity for just kind of looking at that. And also a healthy striver, it might be that this really was okay. Like this was the best that I could do, or it's the best possible outcome we could get, even if it falls short from perfection. But
Yes.
in perfectionistic thinking, anything less than that, again, isn't just, oh gosh, that wasn't the outcome I wanted. It's, I'm a bad person. So those will have very different effects on us, right? Walking through, I wish that could have been a different outcome. I wonder what I can do versus I'm a terrible person. Again, we think of not only the personal effect, but the ripple effect that has on others.
Right. So, we struggle as a profession, around these perpetual perfectionistic thoughts that are just hardwired in us. And all the while our self-compassion is going down over time. And our psychological distress, ultimately, you're going to, you might be able to play the game for a while, right? But eventually you're going to burn your candle from both ends, and you're going to find yourself in a state of, imbalance, right? Or self-destruction.
Absolutely.
So that's perfectionism. That's just one of the patterns. Self-critical inner talk. This was a big one for me as well. This, looking around the room and, comparing yourself to other people, and then the mean, I think, cruel, vicious self-talk in my case, began to become the predominant voice. And that's something that I've had to really work on, in my post-vet school life. So can we talk about, self-critical inner talk and why that's, I mean, it seems obvious on the surface, but can you really, spell this out for us? Why this is so detrimental?
Yeah, I think so much of it can come from the environment. When, again, not unique to veterinary medicine, but certainly in high stakes environments where we will teach, failure is not an option, an error is not an option. A mistake in these high stakes professions could mean death. That is to be taken seriously, right? We don't want to minimize that reality, but we can have a different approach to it. I can likely have better outcomes when I can be curious about the process, when I can recognize I maybe didn't know something, but I'm capable of learning that something. If my only default is I'm just an idiot and I'm not good enough, like where's the growth happen from there? What direction does that even go in? How amenable am I even to sharing that with somebody or getting support from someone else? Because I think I am the root of all problems, right? And so I just where do you go if it's only you that's causing the problem? I don't know what you do with that. I recognize the pattern of thinking. It's interesting. Yes. I would sit in on, various classes, veterinary classes, and also human medicine classes. And I would watch what would happen when a student would raise their hand. And I would even observe the tension. You could see, I would look at them and watch their body language and think, oh, they are debating on whether to even raise their hand, right? And then they would finally get the courage to do it. And the eye rolls or the snickering of the question or the yes. professor who is like, well, we can see who's not paying attention. And I just think, again, the shame of it. And then, so what we will internalize, you idiot, you didn't read the room. You shouldn't have done that. I'm just going to try harder. And so again, it's this protection from having anything negative happen. And then we just start kind of we're just crumpling in on ourselves. And we're doing that through a process of beating ourselves up and constant blame, constant shame, constant not good enough. And I do think medical training and other high stakes. I talk to, pilots who have some of the same and other high stakes environments, but it does not produce a better outcome. But we just, in our own brains, we believe it will, that it will keep us safe and it will help us be okay and not get into trouble. And so it's it's a very enticing belief pattern that we get stuck into.
Yeah. Now, let's move on to we have two more on the list. Catastrophizing. And I think we mentioned this a little bit earlier, and it might have been on the first episode. I think it was, catastrophizing, where, and this is very interrelated with perfectionism in my mind. Right. Because, if the bar is that I can never make the tiniest little mistake, then inevitably when I do, then it actually feeds into inner self-talk. It feeds into the self-talk too, right? Then it's this idea that I made this mistake, therefore I am fill in the blank with something terrible.
Yeah, I think, catastrophizing, when you say it out loud, most people who will relate to it. Like, we've done that at one point. So catastrophizing is that belief, if I make this one mistake, and then it's this whole almost unconscious pattern of thinking we have, then people will laugh at me. I won't have any friends. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be fired. I'm never going to be able to get another job. I'm going to end up homeless on the streets and, die in a pauper's grave. And we laugh when we say that out loud, except most of us can say, yeah, that's exactly what my brain goes to. And so again, it's leading to, if only the most horrendous thing can happen from my error, then again, I'm going to be wired to do everything I can to prevent that. And the default in our brain of doing everything we can is the negativity bias, right? Focusing on the negative things. Our default isn't yet to do everything I can to help prevent that. Is also self-compassion, is vulnerability, is asking for help. We don't by default yet weigh those in to the equation.
And of course, all of the things that we've been discussing are usually reinforced by at least what has been in the past, sort of the cultural norms around a lot of this, right? And so that's what we're by doing this work at the individual level and at hopefully at the team level. I know this is your life's work in a way, right? That we might actually get there as a profession.
Yeah, I will tell you some of the most powerful, if I had like 10 powerful moments in veterinary medicine, they have come down to when an esteemed professional has acknowledged they've made a mistake. You could hear a pin drop in the room. So I remember one time during orientation, the Dean of Student Affairs came in and said, hi, my name is, here's my role. And then the first fact she shared about herself was that she loved chickens. But the second fact was, and I did not pass my boards the first time around. That was part of the conversation. And you could almost hear the gasps. Like, how is somebody in that position, oh my gosh. And the feedback that we would get from that is, oh my gosh, if you're not perfect the first time, but you can go back. And the same thing would happen when, the veterinarians or the guest speakers who would come in would share, here's a time I made a medical mistake. Oh, and gosh, they still have a job and they still love their job and they still have people around them who support them. It was, here's how I learned from it. But we don't hear a lot of those stories. We are being taught by the people who wrote the books and are revered, but they got to where they are because they made a whole bunch of mistakes along the way and will continue to. We just don't more space needs to be created from that, because I see the huge effects on the people who are listening to that. And it makes that expert even that much more relatable.
I'm 44 years old now. And the idea of even sitting down with a room full of people in a social context, and just, where's the beauty of life is in all the messiness, right? The resilience that is being built over time because of these things that came before us, and to live in a space of, I've got it all together and everything is exactly as it should be and nothing could ever be improved upon. Like, where's the interesting, where's the interesting way forward from that? I think that, the shared humanity, right, is something that we all, the vulnerability of saying, yes, I'm not perfect. These are the things that that didn't go as I had hoped in the past. And here I am standing tall, living my dream. And there's the beauty of life from my point of view.
Oh my God. Yeah. I love, first of all, I love sharing my mistakes. I almost always will weave some humor into them, because once you get some distance from them, like in the moment, nothing is funny, but you can look back years later and like there's some humor into it. But I've been part of conversations that instead of oh yeah, well, I've got one, instead of trying to top each other in terms of achievement, it was, like sharing the mistakes. Well, I've got a real doozy for you. And one, just the humor in the room and the laughing and then the relief that you can feel from it. You're knowing you're part of like all of these other people, and that making mistakes and being human is part of it. But the fact that you can channel that into here's what I've learned, here's what I know now, the perspective that I got from that there is just this beautiful component of humanity in those moments. I don't find that beauty of humanity in talking about how perfect we are.
Absolutely. And so let's we're gonna have to wrap this episode up soon. I think I want to just kind of reflect again on, when we get to a place of self-compassion individually, what are the ways in which we flourish as a result of that? And once again, this is a lifelong process, right? This is something, it's not like we check 5 boxes and suddenly we're self-compassionate people, right? Usually it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, hopefully, right? But as we're, the net effect is that we're moving forward on that trajectory. What are the benefits and outcomes of that?
First of all, very good to say. Yeah, it's a process, right? We're not just going to have nailed it. Like today I'll be self-compassionate and then there forever. That's all I think about. It isn't. But one, we do reduce the perfectionist thinking, which is important. We remove those layers of harsh self-criticism. So it opens up the door for curiosity and vulnerability and listening. It also improves that decision-making under pressure, because now it's not, when all we think about is I can't make a mistake, we're more likely to make a mistake. If now the thinking is, I hope I don't make a mistake, I'm going to do everything I can to avoid that. And if it happens, there are still ways I can respond to that. That taking that pressure off actually allows us to perform at a better level. Overall quality of life is improved, whether that's at home or at work in general. And then in terms of a team effect, again, that self-compassion really helps promote a psychological safety and trust within teams.
That's so beautiful. And once again, this is, I think people that are listening, at least this is the way my brain works. I'm always looking for, okay, love everything that they're talking about. I want to aspire to be self-compassionate. What are some tangible first steps that we can take for ourselves as we start to tiptoe into those waters of letting go of some of those old mindsets that aren't healthy, that aren't serving us? What is that? What can that look like on an individual level? What's one thing that we can do, and what's one thing that we can do as a veterinary team?
Again, on an individual level, first we have to be aware. Like some of these thought patterns are so ingrained, we're not even aware we have them. So the first one would be awareness. And then I will tell you, in working with people through the years, if I ask them to replace that mean thing they said for themselves, they struggle with that. But if I say, if you were to hear a loved one say that, what would you say? It starts giving a language for how we would replace it in an area that's just a little less close to home, so we are more able to envision that. And then I think as a team, even, we tend to do the what went wrong today in the rounds, which is fine. We can do that, but what went right? What are the moments of the gotcha, caught you doing something right? Learning how to give, balanced feedback. So part of that is, my gosh, you really handled that situation with this client or this colleague really well. I really appreciated the way that you did that. So calling that out and having a framework, having time to talk about what well are all parts of cultivating self-compassion.
Yeah, I think that it's a conversation that needs to happen. I hope that we've given all of our listeners some food for thought in that area. I know we have. And once again, it's about saying, hey, what's that one little thing that I can do today, and over time, when you reinforce it enough, right, then that becomes the way you are. That's the way you show up and for yourself every day. And then there's always room to build on top of that and keep working towards that more self-actualized, self-compassionate person, right? But it takes time, and we have to have patience with ourselves, right?
We do. And I'll just add one more thing. When all else fails, my shortcut to myself, like on those days you just are not feeling great about yourself, I just have a little mantra that I just say, I'm enough. Right. If I can just hold on to that, I'm enough. It doesn't mean I'm perfect. None of that. Just I'm enough. And have that really ground me. That I have found that to be a very powerful tool.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much once again. This was our second episode on our series, tackling mental health and veterinary medicine. If you didn't get a chance to listen to our first episode on boundary setting, that is available in our archive. And please, of course, like and subscribe to our podcast, and be sure to share this with your colleagues. If you were listening today and this resonated with you, I promise you it's going to resonate with everyone else in the profession as well. So please pass this information along, and continue to show up for yourself every day in the best way that you can. And we're all working towards that end together, and we're going to get there as long as we commit to staying the course, and as long as we stay aware, stay conscious that there is a path forward for all of us. We can do this. So thank you, Dr. Brandt, again for joining us on this episode. We have one more that will be airing in just a couple weeks on cultures of well-being. We hope that you'll tune in for that one as well. Thanks for tuning in to Tales from the Lab.